Hello, beloved Patreon members, and also special guests, because it's the holiday season, and so it seemed to me this would be a perfect time to invite everyone on in for a sneak peek behind the curtains to take a look at what we do here on Patreon. Patreon.com/HeavyMetal101, which is special segments like the one before us today, wherein I am going to talk about some of my very favorite heavy metal books. I know it's AOTY season. I get that, and my first instinct was to do an AOTY episode for December Patreon, but I have a whole shit ton of dissertation rewrites to do. My dissertation is due very soon. Damn it, I just don't have the headspace to take care of that. So that's probably going to have to wait till January. I got a whole big list of Album of the Year candidates, and I got to go through it. And now is not the time. So instead, I thought, well, we're all looking for gift ideas, right? Maybe you want to give yourself, or the loved one in your life, a book about our most favoriteest thing in the world, heavy metal. And so I thought I'd offer a list of some of my favorite heavy metal books. Now, this was partially inspired by a discourse I had online recently with someone who suggested that there are no good books about heavy metal. And this is in reference to a really bad book about heavy metal that I happened to be reading at the time, or have bought, looked at, and then tossed aside, which was a biography of Slayer that turned out to be really just like this entirely AI-generated crap. And so I was lamenting that particular book, and somebody commented that there are no good books about heavy metal, and that is not true at all. In fact, there's a ton of fabulous books, far more than what I'm going to talk about right now. But these are just a few of my favorite things. These are some of the heavy metal books that I really use regularly as resources, that I genuinely enjoyed reading, that I look back on fondly, all that jazz. I strongly endorse all of these books, some with qualifications, some of them are a little out of date and all that, but really good books to get you started on your journey through the heavy metal written literature. Okay. So I'm going to do this by category and also chronologically within those categories. So I'm going to begin with what I call general books. These are pretty much just surveys of heavy metal from its beginnings to the time in which the book was published. So that is the major caveat. Obviously, when a book was published 20 odd years ago, it's dated. That's okay. We have to deal with that, and so I acknowledge that. Now, the first book I've included here is Bang Your Head, The Rise and Fall of Heavy Metal, from 2002, a dated book, by David Kanow. That's K-O-N-O-W. According to David Kanow's bio, he's written for numerous publications and websites including Deadline.com, LA Weekly, The Wrap, Turner Classic Movies, Rue Morgue, TG Daily, Guitar World, Movie Maker, Fangoria, and more. Now, I read his exact bio to note this isn't really a heavy metal dude. This isn't someone that I know really outside of this book. I picked this book up because I like to collect these sort of general histories of heavy metal, and I just, was thinking I'll give it a shot and I'll kind of take my time through it and whatnot, and I really enjoyed it. Basically, this book won me over time. It's not the best of these books, but it's definitely a very solid pre-21st century look into the history of heavy metal. So I do recommend this one. It's well written, well put together, good general survey. Next up, we have Sound of the Beast, The Complete Headbanging History of Heavy Metal by the great Ian Christie. Now, this is also a very dated book. It's from 2003, but Ian Christie's much more of a dude with heavy metal bona fides. He has done a lot of work in metal. He was a disc jockey, and most particularly, he founded the Brooklyn-based Bazillion Points Books, which has a ton of really good heavy metal volumes that are well worth your time. Sound of the Beast is one of them. It is, I think, an indispensable volume. This one, certainly if you're going to choose one or the other between these first two, Sound of the Beast is the one to go with. It is a great classic of general heavy metal knowledge. Do give it a look. I think it's not to be missed. And speaking of not to be missed, we've got another not to be missed. That would be Louder Than Hell, The Definitive Oral History of Metal by John Wiederhorn and Catherine Truman. So this is an oral history. I assume everyone knows what that means, but just to be clear, this is basically just a book that's been put together of quotes. Now, they're lengthy quotes. They tell a story. They're very, very heavily edited to carry a narrative. It's basically the history of heavy metal told by the people who participated in it. This is different than memoir, and heavy metal memoirs, and I have a category for that, are very hit and miss. Some are fantastic and some are terrible. This is just really nicely put together by these two authors, and I think this is entirely indispensable. It's really a wonderful volume. It's also, because it's written in 2013, it does get you well through the 90s and into the early 21st century, which neither of those other volumes do particularly well. So, when you want to get into sort of black metal, metalcore, deathcore, new metal, 90s and later subgenres that emerged, this is definitely a better point of entry, I think, than either of those other books. Really good. Definitely indispensable. You must get it. Check it out. One of these great books. Now, the next book is indispensable to me. I use it as a reference, and I love it. It is Who Invented Heavy Metal? By Martin Popoff from 2015. I really like Martin Popoff's work. I find him really insightful, and I listen to his podcast a lot, History in 5 Songs, and I've read a number of his books. He's not actually my favorite author, really. I think he pumps out books too quickly to really be thought of as a great writer or anything like that, but he's got a great grasp of the material, and he's written a lot of books along the lines of Who Invented Heavy Metal, which is a timeline. It's just a timeline of sort of all of these little things that happened throughout history, really, throughout the entire history of the world, sort of with tongue-in-cheek, but particularly once we get into the 20th century and the 40s, 50s, 60s, leading up to Black Sabbath and the quote-unquote official founding of heavy metal in 1970. So this is a book about everything that happened kind of before that, and it's written in a timeline format. It's not like a compelling read, but it's a fantastic resource if you're really interested in some of these earlier proto-metal, pre-metal details. And Popoff does a nice job of sort of putting all that together. Okay, moving along, still in the same first category. I told you there's a lot of great books. Another one that I think is kind of indispensable, just because it's so fun, A History of Heavy Metal by Andrew O'Neill. Now, this is from 2017, so comparably contemporary, a relatively recent book. And the thing that makes this book so special is that Andrew O'Neill is a comedian, first and foremost. And so Andrew O'Neill now uses the pronoun they. They are non-binary. O'Neill is a comedian first and a heavy metal scholar second. That's not to say they are not an excellent writer, because this is a really well put together book. Look, I'll be honest, if and when I write my own history of heavy metal, this is the sort of book I would write. It's very fun, it's very quirky, it's just a joy to read, but it's also well researched, it's also a genuine history of heavy metal. I sort of shied away from it for a little while, just because of the fact that it's kind of a comedy book, but at the same time, it has the weight of a legitimate pseudo-scholarly, I think scholarly might be a little bit strong, but pseudo-scholarly book on the history of heavy metal, and it's just, again, indispensable. I think it's a really fun read, well worth a look, and I think everybody who listens to my podcast, any Heavy Metal 101 fan, will definitely find a lot to enjoy in A History of Heavy Metal by Andrew O'Neill. Okay, we now move from the general metal books to what I refer to as the subgenre survey books. These are books that tackle only one specific heavy metal subgenre, but they do so relatively broadly, some more so than others. So, the first one is the obvious classic, a seminal book about heavy metal, so much so it was turned into a movie. That would be Lords of Chaos from 1997 by Michael Moynihan and Didrik Søderlind. Lords of Chaos tells, of course, the story of the early Norwegian black metal scene, the one we detailed on our episode about that, although I think we were probably a little bit more rigorous about our facts than maybe Moynihan and Søderlind were. This book is notoriously not super accurate, but it tells the story, and it really gives you a lot of colorful details. It's really well written. It's a fun book. I know there's some controversy about Moynihan out there and some of his political leanings and stuff, and that's not great, but we're talking about Norwegian black metal. None of it's great in terms of politics or the human beings involved. That having been said, it's a fantastic book. The subtitle is The Bloody Rise of the Satanic Metal Underground. You got to read it, I think. And the movie, if you haven't seen the movie, I know so many people who love it. I don't know. I feel like people who are not metal... My sense, I didn't like the movie. I actually I don't want to say I hated the movie because it's a quality movie. I did not like the movie at all. I think it's a movie for people who care more about the story or are more horror movie people, because it's very horrific, than people who are music people. That might be unfair. Maybe I'm being a dick, so that's why I'm a little hesitant to say this. But to me, this movie subsumed the music entirely for the story, and that was a bummer. You should probably see the movie, decide for yourself, but definitely read the book. I think the book is a classic of the genre. Moving on, another classic of the genre with qualifications, Choosing Death, The Improbable History of Death Metal and Grindcore by Albert Moudrian. Now here we have somebody with serious heavy metal bona fides. Albert Moudrian is the founding editor-in-chief of Decibel magazine, which is serious business in our heavy metal world. Here's the thing. This falls under the category of indispensable resource. It's a fantastic book about histories that are not told very many places, and so I think if you're interested in this sort of thing, you have to read it. It's not a good read. It's not a great book. Moudrian, it seems like a cool guy, and it's very well researched and very well detailed. It's just kind of badly written, I think. I got through it. I get through all books. I'm pretty dogged about that. But I didn't like it. I liked its content a lot, and so I recommend it for that. I just didn't like it as a read. It's just not a very fun book to get through. It is, however, an important book. And if you're interested in the history of death metal, and particularly grindcore, death metal is told, I think, in a few places. This really is a great entryway to the early history of grindcore, and this was an indispensable resource for our episode about both the early history of death metal and grindcore, particularly grindcore, again, where you don't get that information in too many other sources. So I recommend this book, but with serious qualifications. A book I recommend with less serious qualifications, though it has some similar problems, is Swedish Death Metal from 2008 by Daniel Ekeroth. This, again, is not the best written book in the world. It's pretty poorly written in a lot of ways. I think it's actually a little bit more just engaging and fun than Choosing Death is, though, again, it suffers from a lot of the same problems. It tells just a very important story of heavy metal, and that would be the story of the development of death metal specifically, obviously, in Sweden over the course of the 1980s and into the 1990s, and the development, particularly as you go forward into that Gothenburg style that's going to evolve eventually into metalcore and really be kind of some of the most important music of the late 90s into the early 20th century. It's an indispensable resource. I am planning a Swedish death metal episode in the very near future for Heavy Metal 101, and this book will be on my lap the entire time. Is it a fun read? Yeah, leave that up to you. It's got lots of cool pictures and stuff and lots of fun information. Ekeroth writes fairly poorly, but it's not unreadable. I've read a lot of heavy metal books that I would describe as functionally unreadable with good information. This is not that bad at all. It's solid. Perfectly solid. I should point out that unlike, I think, everyone else we've listed so far, Ekeroth really was a part of that scene. He was actually in bands in the Swedish death metal scene in those early days, so he really had front row seats and knows all these people and stuff. So that's a little bit different than these other books. Not a memoir, but someone who could have written a memoir about that scene. Moving forward, another really, I think, just indispensable book. This would be Mean Deviation: 4 Decades of Progressive Heavy Metal by Jeff Wagner from 2010. Wagner's a badass. He has a podcast on progressive metal. The name currently escapes me. I don't really like his podcast very much. I find it kind of boring, though I do listen to it periodically for research purposes. But I like Wagner a lot. I think he's a good writer. I think he's very smart, like really, really smart. He's very good at sort of synthesizing information and putting things together. He's not the most compelling writer in the whole history of the world. Again, this book book falls into the category of a little bit of a slog, but it's much better written than some of the other books I was just talking about. And if you're interested in progressive heavy metal, which I barely am, but I am, because it's part of heavy metal, this book is incredibly indispensable. I mean, you got to read this. I use the word indispensable a lot today because these are books you just have to read if you want to know the history of metal, or in this case, more specifically, the history of quote-unquote progressive metal. And it's told in a very unique, very crafty fashion. As I said, Wagner's a really smart guy, and he puts together just a nifty book here. So check it out. Now, no slog here. Now we get into some fun stuff. And that would be Nothing But a Good Time. This is the one with the umlaut over the O for nothing. The subtitle being The Uncensored History of the 80s Hard Rock Explosion. This is by Tom Beaujour and Richard Bienstock. It's got a foreword by Corey Taylor, which really endeared me to Corey Taylor a lot. But this book was written in 2021. This is the oral history of glam metal. There is another Nothing But a Good Time book that is just kind of a history of glam metal. But this one, I think, is the must-read. It's so much fun. It goes in detail through quotation, through the people who were there. And if you care about this music, if you were part of this scene in any way, shape, or form, you'll love this book. It's definitely one that must be read by any glam metal aficionado. Beaujour was the former editor-in-chief of Revolver and Guitar Aficionado, so he's got, some bona fides here. He was definitely involved in metal. And Bienstock is a former senior editor of Guitar World magazine and editor of Guitar Aficionado. So these are dudes who wrote for publications, involved with publications in heavy metal. They know the scene, they know the people, and they really put together something special here. It's a great, great read. Lots of fun. Maybe the funnest book of all of these that I've named so far, if I'm to be totally honest. Okay, end fun now. Now, this next category are not fun books, and unless you really, really care, you might want to skip them. But I really, really care. These are the academic books about heavy metal. Now, I will admit, having sort of surfed around looking for academic books on heavy metal before dealing with this episode and putting together materials, I will note that there are definitely some newer, interesting sounding books on heavy metal that are academic that I haven't gotten to yet. Part of the reason for that is because they are never fun to read. They're always a slog, at least all the ones that I've read so far, and that's pretty much true of almost every academic volume I've ever read. They tend to be written by people who are bad writers but great thinkers, and that's just what you're in for with these books. That having been said, if you care about heavy metal on a deeper intellectual, dare I say, academic level, these books are essential. That would be Running with the Devil, Power, Gender, and Madness in Heavy Metal Music by Robert Walser. Now again, this is a situation where there's another Running with the Devil book about Van Halen. That's a different book. Walser's book is a cultural history of heavy metal, or a cultural critique and analysis of heavy metal, I should say. Walser is a musicologist. He teaches currently at Case Western Reserve University, which actually is kind of adjacent to where I went to school for my undergraduate. I was at the Cleveland Institute of Music, so we took our academic classes at Case Western Reserve. I didn't have any classes with Walser. I'm very sad about that. I don't know if he was there when I was there or not. Probably not. Suffice it to say, all of his other books are not about heavy metal, so this was a youthful book. This was written all the way back in 1993, so it's very much about heavy metal at the heart, or at the beginning, I should say, really, of the downturn. Probably as he was writing this, was really just starting to see glimpses that maybe things were going to change. But this is a book written from a very different perspective than 2025, 1993 being a very different time. That having been said, it is one of the great book-length studies of heavy metal from the perspective of the Academy. It's very formal, very dry, not a fun read at all, but at the same time, excellent. I mean, really thoughtful and worth investigation if you care on that level. And if you don't, I'm here to synthesize these sorts of texts for the podcast audience, so don't feel obligated. These are the kind of places where a lot of our information comes from. Speaking of these places, another really fabulous, more heavy metal-oriented academic is Dino Weinstein. And the next book is Heavy Metal, The Music and Its Culture, which was first published in 2000. Dino Weinstein is a fantastic heavy metal scholar. She's a sociologist, technically, but popular culture is her orientation. And she, unlike Walser, has written a ton of stuff about heavy metal as far as like articles and book chapters and things like that. So she's much more of a heavy metal scholar than is Walser, more broadly. So really an important person to know. Weinstein is Weinstein, well worth checking out. Again, she's an academic, so it's not like these are super fun reads, although I think this book's probably a little bit more fun. Nah. They're both a slog, but I really like Weinstein. I really like her work, and it's worth noting that 2000 is still a long time ago, obviously newer than 1993, and there's a newer version that was published in 2009, an update to Heavy Metal, the Music and Its Culture. So if you want your academic metal to be a bit more 21st century, you can check out that newest edition from 2009, but really good stuff. All right, those are my two academic, I'm going to say recommendations because if you want to read academic books about heavy metal, those must be read. If you don't care about academic books about heavy metal, skip them. You'll be fine. Memoir. All right. So, there are some really wonderful memoirs about heavy metal, and there are some fucking awful memoirs about heavy metal. And I've read both varieties. I'm only providing you here today with highly recommended memoirs, and unlike, say, academic books about heavy metal, or even, dare I say, general books about heavy metal, these have to be both really factually useful and really entertaining. So everything on this list is a fun read, and I recommend it. Buy it for casual reading, and you'll get a lot out of it and have a good time. So, first up is the absolute classic, Fargo Rock City, a heavy metal odyssey in rural North Dakota by the great Chuck Klosterman. This book is from 2001. This book treads sort of a fine line between heavy metal history and memoir. It's unlike A History of Heavy Metal by Andrew O'Neill. It's a little bit on the other side, more memoir than history book. I think O'Neill's book is just a more history book than memoir, but they're both kind of similar. They're both very funny. They're both very fun to read. Really both great. 2001's a long time ago, so we're talking really about 80s metal and early 90s metal here and whatnot primarily. But if you haven't read Klosterman, all of his stuff, maybe not all of it, but his stuff is generally really fun cultural criticism. I've loved most of his books. There's a few that I don't like, but I won't get into that now. Suffice it to say that this is a really, really good one, and especially if you're a glam metal type guy, your Kiss, your Motley Crue, that sort of thing, you're going to absolutely adore this book. But it's really fun memoir. All right, next up, well, the Klosterman, I think, is probably pretty universally known. This is maybe the single most obscure book on this list. I will say that this was given to me as a birthday present by my beloved friend Ross, who co-hosted the Glam Metal Decline and Fall podcast with me not too long ago. Ross gave me this, and I thought it was kind of a gag gift, and I read it, and I fell absolutely in love with it. The book is Snake Eyes: Confessions of a Replacement Rock Star. This is the 2009 autobiography/memoir of a guitarist named Stacey Blades. And Stacey Blades is a dude who basically came onto the LA glam metal scene way after the LA glam metal scene was over, and he became a replacement for a lot of the sort of iconic members of bands. And most famously, he replaced Stacey Guns in LA Guns for a time. And so this is the story of that that scene and all of his experiences kind of living in these like sad late phase glam metal decline and fall period bands and that whole world. It's so much fun. I actually think it's quite well written in a quirky way. If you're interested, I think it's probably a little harder to find than any of these other books, but I love it. I thought it was great. It's really like hit a soft spot in my cold black heart. Okay. Moving along to some things that I think are a little bit more industry standard must-reads. I Am Ozzy from 2010. This would be Ozzy Osbourne's memoir co-written by Chris Ayres. Chris Ayres is a screenwriter and works at British GQ, and I'm sure that without him, this memoir might have been a bit of a mess, but with him, Ozzy's voice comes across so effectively, and you gotta read it. I mean, I Am Ozzy is a perfect heavy metal memoir. I'm currently reading Last Rites, which is Ozzy's final memoir, which is also great, but I Am Ozzy is the must-read of his work, absolutely. Speaking of must-read memoirs, Mustaine, a heavy metal memoir co-written with Joe Layden, who is a journalist and author. Again, I am assuming that Layden ghost wrote this into its beautiful finished form, but you will be very entertained and you will hear the voice of Dave Mustaine very effectively throughout this memoir. I loved it. 2010, another great read. Check it out. Next up, Face the Music, A Life Exposed, from 2014 by my beloved Paul Stanley, co-written with Tim Moore. Tim Moore is a ghostwriter par excellence, and again, I note that all these books generally have ghostwriters, and you can often tell when they don't, because they're usually bad, and so I ain't got no problem with the idea of these people using ghostwriters, and I loved Face the Music. I particularly loved it. One of my favorite things in the world is listening to memoirs on tape when they're read by the author, particularly heavy metal memoirs, and I really, really enjoyed listening to this book as read by Paul Stanley. So fun, and I'm a huge Kiss fan, and I'm particularly a Paul Stanley fan, so that's maybe it's a weakness, I don't know, but I really, really enjoyed Face the Music and recommend it. Speaking of memoirs read by the author that I really enjoyed, maybe my second favorite memoir on this list, Confess, the autobiography by Rob Halford, co-written with Ian Gittins. Gittins is another ghostwriter par excellence. This is such a great memoir, and again, one that I listened to as read by Rob Halford, and I just utterly loved this book, loved listening to Rob Halford read it. It is so great, and it'll make you fall in love with Rob Halford all over again, so do check out Confess, and again, I strongly advise checking it out as a book on tape, as read by Rob Halford. This is another one that I think is a bit funny, kind of like the Snake Eyes, very glam metal. This would be Sex, Drugs, Rat and Roll, My Life in Rock by Stephen Pearcy with Sam Benjamin. It's a little hard to find any information about Sam Benjamin. The only other thing I could really find about him is that he appears to have written his own memoir called American Gangbang, A Love Story. Here's what I'll say about this book. One, it is ghost written like nobody's business. Like, it's very fun, very well put together. I don't know who Benjamin is. I haven't read his own memoir, but this is a great book. It's really good. Number two, Pearcy sort of seems like a horrible asshole in a lot of ways. His sexism and his talk about women is really gross. Probably not unexpected. It's pretty bad, but it's just a very endearing memoir. It's so fun to read. I don't know. Mixed emotions. I love Rat, and I have complicated feelings about this sort of memoir of these like sleazy dudes writing in a sort of self-consciously sleazy style, but I think through Benjamin's intercession, Sam Benjamin makes it all work, and it's just a great read. You should read it. I think you'll like it. Next up, Rainbow in the Dark, the autobiography. This is by Ronnie James Dio, co-written with the great Mick Wall, and also finished by his wife Wendy Dio because it was published posthumously all the way in 2021. The only flaw of this book, maybe, depending on how you look at it, is that it ends in 1986, which is pretty damn early, but it is a great memoir. It is, Mick Wall is excellent. He's done a ton of work in metal and rock, and it's, you got to read this. If you're interested in Ronnie James Dio, Rainbow in the Dark is great. How much of it is his voice and how much of it is Wendy's intercession and how much of it is Mick Wall, I have no idea. But it tells the story really, really effectively of Dio's fantastic life through 1986. Now, let's us get away for one moment from all this gosh dang ghostwriting, and let's talk about Into the Void, From Birth to Black Sabbath and Beyond, by Geezer fucking Butler, no co-writer, 2023. This book is so damn good. We all know Geezer can write. He's the lyricist for Black Frickin' Sabbath, and I loved this book. I loved it. Maybe this might be my second favorite, actually, of these, in the context of listening to Geezer himself read it. He's a terrible reader in a lot of ways. He's not full of vivacious personality like Rob Halford is, but you really get a sense of who he is through a combination of his reading and the actual writing, which is excellent throughout. I love it. It's so fun. It's really a perfect book on tape, or just read it. Either way, you're going to love this. Into the Void is fantastic. Check it out as soon as you can. Now, my very favorite heavy metal memoir of all time is from 2024. It's super recent. And I don't even know if it's a heavy metal memoir. A lot of you won't think it is, but that would be Brothers by the great Alex Van Halen, co-written with journalist Ariel Levy, who is a staff writer at the New Yorker magazine. Brothers is incredible, mostly because it's a book that really is about the music, while telling the story of Alex and Eddie Van Halen's lives. It is so beautifully written and thoughtful, and just, it'll bring tears to your eyes. I will note, kind of like the Dio memoir, this book ends in 1984. It's a little controversial that Alex chose not to talk at all about the Sammy Hagar era, and that seems to be a bit of a pointed thing. But oh my gosh, I truly, truly love this book. I thought it was incredible. Everyone, if you care about Van Halen or the history of rock music or the history of, dare I say, pop metal, it's just a very important book, and it's so good, so good. So that's my favorite of the memoirs category. Okay, this is the final category. I swear, hopefully this proves to everyone that there are, in fact, great books about heavy metal. The last category is band bios. So band bios obviously are books written by another person about the history of a specific band. There's a ton of these. A lot of them are okay. A lot of them are pretty good. These are all great. These are all great band bios. The first, and probably the most classic band bio of all band bios, Hammer of the Gods by Stephen Davis from 1985. This is an unauthorized biography, which are usually the best kind. And there's a lot of questions about how accurate all of Davis's information is, because holy shit, is there a lot of detail in this book, but at the same time, it's just a essential read. Are Led Zeppelin a heavy metal band? No, I don't think they are. I think they're a proto-heavy metal band, but this is a story that is, so interwoven with the history of heavy metal, and really, with Led Zeppelin's antics and their sort of lifestyle and all that, they set the template for so much heavy metal to come. Unless you're totally uninterested in Led Zeppelin, I think you got to read this book, and even then, you'll probably like it. It's a lot of fun. They call him Stephen Salacious because of what's in the book. I suppose the one qualifying remark I'll say is that this book was written in 1985, and Stephen Davis lays out some truly atrocious behavior, like ridiculously bad behavior, without really much in the way of judgment, in a way that I don't think would fly in 2025, and I think that's probably for the best. So you'll be chances are you'll be pretty offended by some of this book, and that's okay. I think the guys from Led Zeppelin suck as human beings, but they made some very, very important music, and this lays all of that out, even if it does so in kind of uncomfortably non-judgmental form. All right, speaking of uncomfortable, non-judgmental, probably the single greatest book ever written about a band other than Hammer of the Gods, The Dirt, Confessions of the World's Most Notorious Rock Band. That would be the collaborative autobiography of Motley Crue, theoretically by the band, Tommy Lee, Mick Mars, Vince Neil, and Nicky Strauss. This ain't no memoir. This is a book by Neil Strauss, ghostwriting the ever-loving hell out of it. Yes, it is theoretically written in the voice of the band, but I think it only works because of the intercession of Strauss. Now, Strauss is not any less controversial than the dudes in Motley Crue. He might even be worse. He's the guy who wrote The Game, Penetrating the Secret Society of Pickup Artists. He's a terrible monster, just like everybody in Motley Crue were terrible monsters. Maybe except for Mick Mars. He seems like a pretty decent guy. But it's an incredible book. It's so fun. You'll love it. You got to read it. If you care at all about glam metal, Motley Crue, it's one of the best. So Strauss sucks. The guys in Motley Crue suck. Everyone in this book should be punched in the face multiple times, but it's still a great book. Shitty band, great book. Yes, that's right, I think Motley Crue are a shitty band, but still, great book. Hey, they have, 2 pretty solid albums. All right, last but not least, I'm going to show my bias here. A book that I adore, that probably anyone who is not a Kiss fan, you can stop the podcast now. You don't have to listen. But Kiss Behind the Mask, the official authorized biography from 2003 by David Leaf and Ken Sharp. David Leaf is an experienced writer of books about bands. He wrote about the Beach Boys, amongst other. And Ken Sharp is an author and a liner note dude who has a great pedigree as well. And they just put together a book that any Kiss fan is going to love. It goes into detail on every single song written by the band. If you're a Kiss fan like I am, you can't not have this book. It's just really, really great as a resource about, one of my favorite bands of all time, the great Kiss. Before we part, I also want to be sure to shout out 4 wonderful books by authors who were kind enough to grace us with their presence here on Heavy Metal 101. I love all of these guys, and I love all of their books. That would be Experiencing Black Sabbath, A Listener's Companion by Nolan Stoltz from 2017. Metallica, the $24.95 book from 2021 by Ben Apatow. Heroes of the Metal Underground, the definitive guide to the 1980s American independent metal bands by Alexandra Anasiadis, with Yannis Skarpelos contributing. That was from 2023. And, most recently, A Heavy Metal History Lesson, a collection of essays to summarize the events that inspired our favorite heavy metal songs, and that was by Josh Putnam, written in 2025. Please do be sure to check out all of those books by friends of our show. You will not be disappointed. All right, I have talked incessantly about books for a long time now because I love books. Hell, I might even like books more than I like music. Now, I like heavy metal more than I like books about heavy metal, but I love heavy metal books that are good, and I read heavy metal books that are okay or bad. But every book I've laid out here today, these are great books. Pick them up as a gift for yourself, for your loved ones, and have yourselves a fantastic freaking holiday season, a fantastic new year, and thank you for listening. I love all you people. You're the best. Our patrons, particularly, without you guys, I don't know where we'd be. You are the awesomest of the awesome, but all of our listeners are great. And if you are not currently a Patreon, why don't you come on by? Come and check us out, patreon.com/heavymetal101. We'd love to have you. Maybe that could be your gift to somebody, a Patreon membership for Heavy Metal 101. Regardless, we'll see you in 2026. Happy New Year from Heavy Metal 101.